good morning, evening, or night. Wherever you are, welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Thursday, 15th May 2025, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. China's economic trajectory faces headwinds, with the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation projecting a growth deceleration to 2.6% in 2025. To mitigate the impact of US tariffs, China is encouraging tech platforms to bolster support for self-employed vendors. Retaliatory tariffs were implemented by China in response to US tariffs on items like flat-screen TVs. While a temporary truce in the trade war with the US offers a brief respite, industry experts anticipate lingering challenges. CATL is launching a $4.60 billion Hong Kong IPO to fuel its international expansion. Jiangsu Hengrui Pharmaceuticals is also planning a Hong Kong listing, joining Singapore-based Merck's in tapping into a revitalized market. Alibaba reported a 6% year-on-year increase in annual revenue, despite a spending slowdown. Starbucks is exploring avenues to expand its footprint in China, seeking insights from potential investors. The nation is restricting children's use of generative AI in schools, while promoting AI adoption in traditional industries, as Tencent plans to develop an AI agent through WeChat. Advancements in AI are also being seen in the defense industry. The share price of Avic Chengdu Aircraft has been volatile, and China's coal market is experiencing oversupply issues. China is also seeking to strengthen its international ties, evidenced by a recent letter to a foreign business community. China has also been making major investments in Brazil. Turning to the United States, the nation's trade relationship with China remains intricate, characterized by fluctuating tariffs and ongoing negotiations. Shipments from China and Hong Kong, valued under $800, could face tariffs as high as 54%. Tariffs previously imposed by President Trump on Chinese goods prompted retaliatory actions from China, affecting multiple sectors. The temporary 90-day tariff truce has provided some market optimism, but concerns persist, particularly for small businesses. Following their tariff reductions, Washington has been making major investments in the Middle East. U.S. stock futures slipped in overnight, trading after the S&P 500 index rose for a third straight day. In Foxconn has secured government approval to establish a $433 semiconductor plant through a joint venture, aiming to enhance its manufacturing capabilities within the country. Elsewhere, Boeing's operations have suffered due to trade tensions between the U.S. and China, leading to China halting plane deliveries. Siemens is experiencing revenue growth due to the recovery of factory automation in China. Saudi Arabia is increasing its purchases of AI chips. Interactive Brokers adds Ping of China's HK dividend ETF to no-fee offering. United States. The U.S. economy is navigating uncertainty, with wholesale prices surprisingly decreasing by 0.5% in April, despite President Trump's tariffs on imports. Retail sales experienced a slight uptick after March's surge, fueled by consumer anticipation of tariffs. Jobless benefit applications remain stable, suggesting limited layoffs despite trade concerns. The U.S. and China temporarily paused their trade war, resulting in a mixed performance on Wall Street. Some observers view investor relief as complacency, fearing a potential financial crisis driven by President Trump's policies. U.S. lawmakers are contemplating a State Department overhaul due to tariff confusion, while trade partners explore new economic alliances. The U.S.-China trade dispute may result in Europe becoming a destination for inexpensive goods. Producer prices are unexpectedly declining in the U.S. as margins shrink, and U.S. bonds face risks akin to a Liz Truss moment due to a growing deficit. Oil prices are falling as President Trump signals progress on a nuclear deal with Iran. The U.S. trade chief engaged with Korean counterparts to discuss tariffs, while U.S. and Chinese trade negotiators convened in South Korea. Irish exports to the U.S. surged by 395% in March due to tariff threats, and a Dominican airline is expanding in the U.S. amid rival retrenchment. Stock market futures, including Dow, S&P 500, and NASDAQ, are dipping ahead of Walmart earnings and a speech by Jerome Powell. Dow futures dropped 160 points as Fed chair. Jerome Powell expressed concerns about potentially higher long-term rates. Wall Street and global markets are generally down, and oil prices are dropping by $2 on hopes for a U.S.-Iran nuclear agreement. Stocks saw a mixed close on Wall Street, retaining most gains from earlier in the week, following the U.S. and China's trade war ceasefire. Global shares are increasing, while the U.S. dollar is stabilizing after a recent sharp decline. The S&P 500 is rising for a third day, as traders extend the tariff relief rally. U.S. stocks ended mixed, holding on to most gains made earlier this week. U.S. stocks mostly rise on better inflation data, while dollar retreats. The U.S. and China agree to cut tariffs, 90-day pause. The podcast, Thruffline, discusses how the hunt for Al Capone transformed the IRS into a powerful tool. U.S. crypto investors contributed millions to Donald Trump's election victory and expressed dissatisfaction with Biden at consensus. U.S. smartphone shipments increased by 30% in March as manufacturers like Apple and Samsung anticipated new tariffs. Russia's relationship with Ukraine remains tense, with significant geopolitical ramifications. Russian nationalists are advocating for Moscow to continue its involvement in Ukraine. Russia asserts that its position on Ukrainian peace is based on the current situation. Planned Russia-Ukraine talks have disrupted the European push for U.S. sanctions on Moscow. Prior to discussions in Istanbul, Putin consulted with top Russian officials. The Moscow Stock Exchange Index decreased after the announcement of the composition of the Russian delegation. The Russian stock market, MOEX index, and share prices are being closely monitored, including those of financial, oil and gas, and chemical companies. A Russian court sentenced a prominent election monitoring activist to 5 years in prison. Russia's alleged sabotage across Europe continues unpunished. Public sentiment in Russia shows dissatisfaction with salaries. In international relations, Prime Minister Anwar has invited Russian airlines, including Aeroflot, to resume direct flights to Malaysia, highlighting Russia's friendly relationship with Malaysia. China's trade relations with the United States are complex, characterized by periods of conflict and negotiation. The U.S. and China temporarily halted their trade war, initially causing a mixed close on Wall Street. Investor relief is viewed by some as potentially complacent, with risks of a financial crisis due to President Trump's policy. The U.S.-China trade conflict may lead to Europe becoming a dumping ground for cheap goods. U.S. and Chinese trade negotiators met in South Korea for discussions. The U.S. and China agreed to cut tariffs and implement a 90-day pause. Chinese stocks risk expulsion in Trump's trade war. Saudi Arabia and the United States are seeking closer financial ties. President Trump visited Riyadh, where he met with U.S. corporate CEOs and CXOs, including Elon Musk and Sam Altman, to discuss strategic deals and implications for the crypto market in 2025. Malaysia maintains positive relations with Russia, as emphasized by Prime Minister Anwar, who invited Russian airlines, including Aeroflot, to resume direct flights to Malaysia. India is experiencing positive economic indicators as retail inflation eased to 3.16% in April, fueling hopes for interest rate cut. This optimism drove a stock market surge on May 15th, with the Sensex rising by 1.48% to close at 82,530.74, a gain of 1,200.18 points, and the Nifty 50 increasing by 1.6% to end at 25,060.1, up 300, and investors gained approximately €5 lakh crore, increasing the BSE market capitalization to €440 lakh crore. Small cap stocks are leading the bull run, with the Nifty Small Cap 100 index gaining 7% this week, driven by geopolitical easing and improved earnings expectations. The National Stock Exchange, NSE, has become India's largest unlisted firm, boasting over 1 lakh shareholders. The Reserve Bank of India, RBI, has relaxed certain investment limits for foreign investors in corporate bonds, and SEBI has proposed easing access to government securities. GM Financial's model portfolio favors banks and infrastructure, but urges investor caution. Shares of Went India Limited fell over 17% after Went GmbH announced plans to sell its entire 37.5% stake via an offer for sale at a discounted price. Sanofi India reported a 12.5% fall in profit to €119.5 crore in its Q4 results, despite a 4.9% increase in revenue. The Indian government is focused on boosting domestic manufacturing through initiatives like the Make in India campaign and promoting self-reliance in defense, as reflected in the rally of defense stocks. India has approved a joint venture semiconductor unit between HCL and Foxconn, and has also approved more Russian insurers to provide marine cover. Former U.S. President Trump claimed that India offered to eliminate tariffs on U.S. goods, potentially impacting Apple's plans to shift iPhone production to India for export back to the U.S. Amid global economic uncertainty, inflation in the United States has eased, with the Consumer Price Index, CPI, increasing by 2.3%, raising hopes for potential interest rate cuts. Former President Trump has urged Apple to keep production in the U.S. rather than moving it to India, and also claimed that India offered to eliminate tariffs on U.S. goods. Following comments backing Pakistan, Indian citizens are reportedly dropping Turkey travel plans. United Kingdom. The UK saw its economy grow at its fastest pace in a year during the first quarter of 2025, expanding by 0.7%, which supports the Labour government's economic growth agenda. Investors are analyzing this positive economic data alongside mixed earnings reports, resulting in a flat performance for the FTSE 100. The pound has strengthened against a weaker dollar, and UK stocks have generally increased. The UK is exploring a new Investor Visa program focused on attracting foreign investment into key sectors. A proposed tax incentive designed to boost trade with India has been characterized as Britain's most misunderstood initiative. While some UK companies, such as Deliveroo, have been acquired by foreign entities, indicating potential difficulties in retaining major firms, Newlat Food is planning an IPO in London, suggesting the UK market remains attractive to some businesses. UK Bank Zopa has obtained $106 million in a tone capital, and a bid for H&T underscores potential value in UK stock. The Prime Minister is currently holding a news conference as the UK prepares to send unsuccessful asylum seekers abroad. Ukraine-Russia conflict and peace talks. And Ukrainian President Zelensky has arrived in Turkey to engage in peace talks aimed at resolving the ongoing conflict with Russia. Russian President Putin was not present at the negotiations, with Russia instead dispatching a group of experienced negotiators. Zelensky commented that Putin is scared to meet him directly and described the Russian delegation as decorative. Notably, both Putin and former U.S. President Trump were not in attendance at the peace talks. Taiwan. Taking cues from Ukraine's defense strategies, Taiwan is implementing a revised approach to warfare that includes being armed by the US and integrating technological advancements. European Union. French President Macron has asserted that the European Union needs to redefine its relationship with the United Kingdom. Europe's equity markets saw mixed performance influenced by earnings, UK economic figures, and geopolitical tensions. A prior week-long rally gave way to a pullback driven by underwhelming earnings reports. Milan Stock Exchange stood out as the only one in positive territory, boosted by Anapol's gains, while Spanish stocks marked a 16-year peak. 111 February, the European Stability Mechanism, ESM, chose Eurex clearing for handling IIS. European exchanges are actively strategizing to retain IPOs within Europe, aiming to counter the allure of US markets by addressing associated costs and risks. News of potential talks between Putin and Ukraine drew criticism from European leaders. Germany's stance on NATO provided a boost to European defense stocks, which saw gains following the comments. Conversely, ThyssenKrupp faced a sharp decline, with its shares plummeting by 12%. In the United States, President Trump's auto tariffs are impacting both European and American automakers, who are hoping for a more favorable resolution. Cybersecurity firm Proofpoint, under CEO Sumit Dhawan, is reportedly planning to acquire a European competitor for over $1 billion, a strategic move to enhance its market presence as it explores a potential IPO. Asian shares presented a mixed picture, reflecting Wall Street's volatility and diverse regional influences. Early trading saw declines mirroring weak equities markets, with technology sector weakness contributing to the downturn. Investor sentiment remains cautious, despite some relief over a US-China agreement. In India, Reliance Industries' investment in Asian Paints, initially valued approximately $500 crore in 2008, has appreciated significantly to $1,730 crore, marking a 46% increase in value. Saudi Arabia witnessed significant economic activity, spurred by international partnerships and investments. Former U.S. President Donald Trump's visit solidified a renewed Saudi-U.S. partnership, with Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund, PIF, committing billions to U.S. asset management firms. PIF signed deals worth $11 billion, with companies like BlackRock, Neuberger Berman, and Franklin Templeton, including a $5 billion investment specifically in Saudi financial markets. The White House highlighted exports from Boeing and GE Vernova as part of this deepened relationship. Wall Street's high-frequency traders are increasingly active in the Saudi market. Saudi Arabia is also poised to invest heavily in AI chips, which benefits NVIDIA, especially with potential easing of U.S. chip restrictions. NVIDIA is expanding its AI presence through Saudi partnerships, including a deal with AI startup HUMAIN, potentially supplying 18,000 AI chips. Projections estimate the Saudi Arabia generative AI market will reach USD 579.8 million by 2030, showing a compound annual growth rate CAGR of 17.5%. The Saudi Arabia e-prescribing market is also projected to reach USD 180.61 million by 2033, growing at a CAGR of 22.61%. United States, once a beacon for global researchers, now risks a brain gain opportunity for other nations due to perceived diminishing support for American research institutions under President Trump. Trade relations are also in flux, particularly with India, where tariff negotiations continued despite initial suggestions of resolution. Domestically, Lena has partnered with Icon to build 100 3D-printed homes in Austin, Texas, potentially transforming the construction industry. However, skepticism persists abroad, as seen in the United Kingdom, where American food accounts for less than 2% of imported food despite trade agreements. India remains engaged in discussions with the United States regarding tariffs. Conflicting signals emerged after President Trump's suggestion that India was prepared to eliminate tariffs. However, India's foreign minister clarified that negotiations are still ongoing. United Kingdom consumers demonstrate a marked preference for non-American food sources. Less than 2% of the nation's imported food originates from the United States, highlighting ongoing consumer concerns despite existing trade agreements. Turkey is currently hosting peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, although neither Russian President Vladimir Putin nor former U.S. President Donald Trump are attending. Ukrainian President Zelensky will be present. Russia's delegation includes an aide, a diplomat, and an intelligence officer. Putin's absence has complicated the discussions. Turkish President Erdogan is positioning himself as a potential mediator, possibly acting on behalf of Trump. Germany's stance on international defense spending has been voiced by Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul, expressing support for U.S. President Donald Trump's initiative to elevate NATO members' defense spending to 5%. Meanwhile, in the economic sphere, Samsung is poised to acquire Flacht Group, a German manufacturer of cooling systems, in a deal valued at $1.70 billion. In response to international sanctions, Metz is integrating Russian assets into its business operation. An investigation is underway by the World Economic Forum's board into allegations leveled against its founder, German economist Klaus Schwab, concerning the misuse of funds and inappropriate remarks. Japan's investors are on an 8-week buying spree of foreign stocks, encouraged by positive global trade signs. However, the Nikkei 225 index in Japan dipped by 0.88% as the yen gained strength. A slight market recovery is anticipated. Mitsuho reported record annual profits, but saw an 18% drop in profits during the fourth quarter. Japan Display is struggling with financial losses, and listed subsidiaries in Japan are facing cuts due to investor concerns. Wealthy investors in Japan are wary of a possible yen crash. Vanguard and RBC Blue Bay are buying up distressed 30-year Japanese bonds. Furthering international economic ties, Japan will hold a third round of trade talks with the U.S. Australia's job market saw robust growth in April, adding 89,000 positions while the unemployment rate remained steady. This positive data helped push Australian shares higher, marking their 7th straight session of gains after an uncertain beginning. Turning to corporate developments, Insignia Financial revealed that Bain Capital has retracted its offer to acquire the company, prompting ongoing talks with CC Capital. Treasury Wine Estates announced the appointment of Sam Fisher as its new CEO, a decision that negatively impacted the company's stock price. In regulatory news, Australian authorities have accused Macquarie of misreporting short sales, alleging discrepancies involving up to $1.5 billion. South Africa is preparing for President Cyril Ramaphosa's visit to the United States, aimed at easing tensions with President Trump. In economic developments, Patrick Lamini has been appointed as the new CEO of the Public Investment Corporation. The first avocado shipment of the season has been dispatched to China, as markets anticipate the release of March's mining sector data. The South African rand saw a boost, following indications of a possible adjustment to the nation's inflation target. Concurrently, South Africans are increasingly turning to loans to meet their financial obligations. Discovery Green and Sasol have launched Ampli Energy to broaden access to renewable energy for businesses. Qantas has also commenced direct international flights within South Africa, improving the nation's global connectivity. Thailand recently intercepted a massive shipment of 238 tons of illegally imported electronic waste originating from the U.S., marking a significant enforcement action against environmental crime. In other news, Xiao Chun-chen, a Thai resident, attained financial independence after being laid off earlier this year, now working just 3 hours weekly in Singapore. Taiwan's financial markets are bustling, seeing investors accumulate Taiwan dollars at levels unseen since late 2020. According to a Reuters poll, fueling this activity is a surge in Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing, TSMC shares, buoyed by optimistic stock researcher forecasts as the stock nears $1,000. The island nation is gearing up to host Computex, a key technology event highlighting advancements in artificial intelligence, AI, where NVIDIA's WHAM is anticipated to play a leading role. In terms of international relations, Taiwan has voiced its support for India amid its ongoing tensions with Pakistan, while also strongly condemning terrorism. The nation is also actively managing concerns about the exposure of its state banks to U.S. bonds to reassure investors and preserve financial stability. South Korea continues its focus on small modular reactor technology. Canon Korea marked its 40th year, aiming for a leading role in video production. The National Pension Service strategically invested in tech giants such as Apple and Nvidia. A South Korean deputy finance minister held foreign exchange talks with a U.S. Treasury representative. Separately, celebrity chef Park Jong-won is battling online defamation through legal means. In Qatar, remarks by U.S. President Donald Trump about a potential U.S.-Iran nuclear agreement led to a drop in oil prices. Adding to this sentiment, a high-ranking Iranian official, a close ally of the supreme leader, announced Tehran's willingness to forgo highly enriched uranium in a nuclear agreement with the United States. Estonia has expressed concerns about potential Russian military action. The action could be to safeguard its shadow tanker fleet. This fleet is allegedly circumventing sanctions to maintain oil income. Shifting focus to Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced new measures to support Ukraine. The measures include financial aid and military equipment. Canada reaffirmed its commitment to Ukrainian sovereignty. Meanwhile, in France, President Emmanuel Macron addressed the nation regarding pension reforms. The reforms have sparked widespread protests. Macron defended the changes as necessary for economic stability. In the United States, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates again. The increase aims to combat persistent inflation. But the move has sparked debate about potential recession risks. Serbian authorities are currently investigating the alleged forging of a crucial document. This document permitted the demolition of a protected site in Belgrade. The demolition made way for the construction of a Trump-branded hotel. An official has admitted to forging the document, according to Serbian authorities. Jared Kushner's company released a statement. It claimed they were unaware of the alleged forgery before media reports surfaced. Brazil is deepening its strategic partnership with China, focusing on increased trade and enhanced diplomatic cooperation. Turning to Canada, the S&P TX Composite closed higher, showing a gain of 0.3%. Robinhood is also expanding its footprint into Canada by acquiring Wonderfy in a $179 deal, strategically positioning itself in the cryptocurrency market amid evolving regulatory framework. In Colombia, lawmakers have once again blocked President Gustavo Petro's proposed labor law reforms. Denmark's economic growth, previously robust due to pharmaceutical exports, is expected to slow down this year. This deceleration occurs in a climate of broader economic concerns, including the potential consequences of tariffs. Following his arrival in the United Arab Emirates, President Trump made comments singling out France, with comments about WHAM. Hong Kong is currently grappling with a surge in COVID-19 cases, marking the beginning of a new wave. Despite this public health challenge, Singapore-based biotech startup Mirxes proceeded with its IPO in Hong Kong, aiming to raise $181 million. In Israel, a Taurus APO filing identifies the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict and broader regional geopolitical tensions as potential risks to its business operation. Italy is set to host the America's Cup sailing competition for the first time. On the economic front, Prime Minister Meloni intends to implement another cut to Italy's payroll taxes in the next budget. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar and Russian President Putin have expressed mutual interest in strengthening trade and investment ties between their nations. Mexico's growing fintech sector requires government backing to maintain its current growth trajectory. But on this growth trajectory, Poland demonstrated strong economic performance, leading Eastern Europe in economic growth during the first quarter. Qatar received a business boost from Boeing. Russia's President Putin and Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar have expressed mutual interest in deepening trade and investment ties between their respective countries. Singapore is also experiencing a spike in COVID-19 cases, mirroring the situation in Hong Kong. However, Singapore-based biotech startup Mirxes launched an IPO in Hong Kong, aiming to raise $181 million. Spain will restrict access to Madrid's airport, limiting entry to travelers only. This measure is designed to prevent homeless individuals from using the airport terminals as sleeping areas. Syria anticipates increased investment following the easing of U.S. sanctions, with a sense of optimism in Damascus. However, the pace of economic reconstruction remains uncertain due to the extensive damage caused by war and sanctions. In the United Arab Emirates, President Trump singled out France with comments about WHAM after arriving. The United States sees Robinhood expanding its operations into Canada through the acquisition of Wonderfee for $179. President Trump singled out France with comments about WHAM after arriving in UAE. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.